I got into this industry, not necessarily because I was like, oh, I want to be a financial planner and I love, Wall Street and all this. No, it wasn't that. I got into this business because I saw bad financial planning, how it affected my direct family all around me. And so my whole exposure to the financial industry wasn't a positive one. It was very negative pertaining to, I saw how the experience my family had. And I also, when I would do these phone calls, listening to this gentleman talk to my grandfather, he was just selling him stuff. All right, welcome everybody to the 10 Fears of Retirement podcast. I'm very excited to be launching this podcast in correspondence to my first book, 10 Fears of Retirement. And, a lot of people that I've been working with pertaining to clients and families that I work with, friends, family who've been, inquiring, hey, Alex, when's your book coming out? What's this look like? I wanted to give a little bit of background in this first podcast of, introducing myself, walking you through why this book was written and kind of what the story is of me getting into financial planning, because I think it's really important. Everybody in every industry, every sector, they're always talking about, what's the story? Why do you do what you do? Why do you care, right? And I think that's just the absolute root of all things is you got to start there. So really quick, before I get into the book and talk about some of the great things we're going to be covering in this book, what I want to talk about is really my story and how I got into this business. So financial planning is an interesting world, right? You hear all these great stories and you hear all these terrible stories and everything in between. And it's like any other industry. And what I mean by that is there's good and bad of everything. There's great financial planners who truly are fiduciaries. They care. When they are working with a family, they're genuinely working with the family to help them and put them in a better spot, add value to their life and situation and financial planning needs. On the other side of the fence, you do also have some financial planners who it's purely about the money, right? And how they make money and probably do some things that aren't in the family's best interest. And so there's a couple things I'm going to be doing throughout this book, this podcast, is not only hopefully informing you of potential roadblocks and mistakes and fears that most retirees have, but also I'm going to be peeling back the onion a little bit on our industry as a whole, because I think that's a really important part of the education when it comes to, hey, who should I work with as a financial planner? Am I somebody who needs a professional, right? And then what makes up a good professional? What should that relationship look like? What investments should we be looking like? Now, I will say I'm not going to be making recommendations on investments here, but I will be walking through those very, very important factors of how you can make an informed decision, not only on your retirement planning, what things to look for, but also, hey, how do you identify a good financial planner? So those are kind of some three big 30,000 view looking down topics that I'm going to cover, but kind of back to my story. So it was the early 2000s, and I was actually in college, and I'd come back from college, and it was right around Thanksgiving, Christmas, and I came back, and my grandfather, who is my mom's dad, was at the house. Now, he lived in a place called Boyne City, Michigan, and usually around the holidays, he would stay up in that area, but my grandmother predeceased him by about 10 years, so he had been alone for about 10 years. And so I come back from college, I come back from school, and there's Grandpa at the house for the holidays. And I said, hey, Mom, awesome. Grandpa's hanging out for the holidays. Yep, excited, wonderful. A little bit of background on my grandfather. He owned a party store in a place called Fenton, Michigan. And he sold that party store, moved up to that Boyne City area, and then he had a couple different businesses. So he was a successful businessman throughout his life, and he was very generous, biggest heart, one of the nicest, most caring men I to this day had ever encountered. So had a huge heart. So he's a successful businessman. My grandmother predeceases him, and again, this is about 10 years into that, and my grandpa, he never had a financial plan pertaining to income distribution, all that. Now, I didn't figure this stuff out till later out in our relationship, but I come back from school, Grandpa's there. I asked Mom, hey, what's Grandpa doing? Because usually he wouldn't necessarily come around for the holidays. He stayed up in Boyne because there was other family up there. So he just wanted to come see you and the girls, and I have some sisters. And I said, oh, great, okay. So I go back to school, and then I come back for summer. And Grandpa's still there. I said, okay, Mom, what's going on here? And she said, listen, Alex, she's like, Grandpa's had some financial troubles. and we're helping him out. So he's going to be staying with us and, helping him out on that front. And I said, okay, great. Now, I was young and, I'm in my early 20s. I don't really understand what we're talking about at this thing. When you're 21 years old, you're not thinking, oh, I could run out of money in retirement, right? There's other things you're focused on. So this was my first encounter with like what it looks like when somebody does a poor or bad financial plan long-term. So then let's fast forward. I come back from school, I get out of college, and I start spending a little bit more time talking to my grandfather. I hear him on phone calls talking to his financial planner. And over time, my grandfather, because that was kind of what I was getting into is the financial planning world. And so over time, my grandpa let me start getting involved in these conversations. And so I'd get to listen to the call he would make with the advisor. And I noticed something really quick. The gentleman was always selling my grandpa something. Hey, John, I got a great new stock for you. Hey, John, this is something we need to be doing. And it was always selling a stock or selling him some type of investment or holding. He never asked my grandpa questions such as, hey, John, what's your income need look like here on a monthly basis? Hey, how much are you getting from Social Security? He never asked my grandpa if you did or didn't have a pension. Hey, do you have any outside accounts? What's in your bank account? Hey, how are you doing month to month? Nothing around that. There's never conversations about income distribution, taxes, and those details that in my experience now are absolutely critical for a good financial plan. So with all that being said, I go through this whole process of watching my grandfather, and I didn't really understand the gravity, but he ran out of money. He ran out of money, had to move in with my parents. And then, I love my grandpa, and he was the greatest guy ever, but I watched how it impacted him, first and foremost. I watched how it impacted my parents, and then I watched how it impacted me and my sisters. Now, I'm the youngest in my family. I have 3 older sisters, and, I would say it probably had the biggest impact on me because I was the only one in the house at the time. So I go through this process, and I remember early in the process, I called my cousin Mike, and he's my business partner, my mentor in this business. And I call Mike, and I say, hey, Mike, talk to me a little bit about what happened with Grandma and anything you were able to do. Because the funny part of this story, it's not funny, it's kind of ironic, but my grandma on the other side of the family, my dad's side of the family, had the exact same experience, a little bit different. But she ran out of money, had to move in with my cousin Mike's parents, and he went through that years before I did. So it was interesting that, on both sides of my family, my surviving grandparent ran out of money and had to move in with their kids. And so, selfishly, and I always joke around about this with some of the families I work with. It was like, I didn't want that to happen to my parents, I'm 40, 50, 60 years old, whatever that looks like, and my parents run out of money and have to move in with me. And so selfishly, I started really wanting to learn about this so I could help my parents avoid this. And that was kind of my first step getting into this industry. So I got into this industry, not necessarily because I was like, oh, I want to be a financial planner and I love, Wall Street and all this. No, it wasn't that. I got into this business because I saw bad financial planning, how it affected my direct family all around me. And so my whole exposure to the financial industry wasn't a positive one. It was very negative pertaining to, I saw how the experience my family had. And I also, when I would do these phone calls, listening to this gentleman talk to my grandfather, he was just selling him stuff. And I could feel it. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel genuine. This doesn't feel like a fiduciary, right? So that's my story on how I got into the business. And the most important thing I would say to anybody out there listening, if you're getting into finances, if you're kind of somebody who's looking to get into the business, you gotta have something that makes you tick, that reminds you why you need to do the right thing for people you work with. And then vice versa. If you're somebody out there listening who is a retiree or going to be nearing retirement, you need to be looking for people who truly have your best interest. And I could tell you, oh, do they, are they a fiduciary? Do they have this certificate? Do they have this license? Is that important? Absolutely. But in my opinion, the most important thing you can do on that subject is trust your gut. You meet people, if they're genuine or not. and you got to trust your gut with this stuff. So that would be the probably the biggest tip I would give from my experience of just kind of how I got into the business. Now taking that a little bit forward, I'll tell you a little bit about my experience so you're listening to somebody who didn't start doing this a couple days ago, right? So as of this time, I've been in the business, pertaining to financial planning, insurance, securities, all that stuff. I've been in the business as a whole for over 10 years. Now, my first exposure to the business, or over a decade, if you will. My first exposure to the business of really getting into it was again with my cousin Mike. He owns a financial planning firm. He and I are partners. I work with him and have a great relationship, and it's been a great run. But over a decade I've been in the business, and the areas that I tend to lean into is income planning and distribution. My personal and professional opinion is that's probably the very most important thing of retirement, right? The most common fear, and the book obviously is the 10 fears of retirement. I'm going to be talking about these 10 fears, and I'm going to be going through obstacles and specific, client experiences I had and have had with families, and helping you understand how you can avoid those things you can do to be proactive to avoid those obstacles. But the most common fear that I run into on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is, Alex, I don't want to run out of money. And that one is so close to my heart because obviously my grandfather and my grandma. So there's things that you can do to avoid running out of money. And again, that's going to be one of the first chapters we dive into. So, running out of money, having all these fears and going through that, it was like all of a sudden I'm meeting with all these people and I start identifying they all have kind of the same fears. So the first most important thing I would highlight about my experience is income planning is paramount to me. Some people would call that distribution planning, right? Hey, how much should I be drawing out of my 401k, IRA, 403b? On a monthly basis. Do I pay taxes on that? How do I pay taxes on that? So that distribution income planning is kind of the foundation of my expertise. Investments, of course, that's how I make money. That's how all financial planners make money, is the investment choices, managing the money, or I should say the majority of financial planners. So that's the fun part, right, is getting to pick the stocks and do all that stuff, and I'll talk about that. But the investments is obviously very important, because one thing that's important, and I'll talk about this when I get to that chapter, income planning should be the first step, because it helps you understand how much risk you should be taking. AKA, what is your required rate of return? What's your required rate of return to make sure you never run out of money based on your distribution plan? That's where it all starts. So then you identify that, and then you go into, what investments align with that rate of return, that range of risk. And so income planning to investments, and then tax planning. And I don't want to pretend I'm a CPA. I'm not a CPA, but what I have done and what I feel very comfortable with is helping people understand how to minimize taxes over that distribution time, over that income plan that may be 10, 20, 30 years. So understanding there's income planning, there's investment choices, there's tax planning, and then it gets into the other stuff. And I say this is fun for me too, is getting into like what a legacy plan looks like. Again, I'm not an attorney, right? I didn't pass the bar. I studied it for a couple of years in college and realized, hey, there's a lot of reading and writing of some stuff that maybe doesn't interest me all that much, so I switched. But, I'm not an attorney. But again, you have to have good people in your network. And that's one of the biggest things I've figured out in this business is I have a great network around me of experts. I might know enough to be dangerous, right? I can talk a little bit about a trust and how those can work in a general sense of how it can go into investments. I can't give advice on that, but I know enough to be dangerous. It's the same thing with the tax discussion. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not a CPA. But again, a good financial planner, and this is just a little nugget that I'll talk about again later in the book, is a good financial planner. They're not going to know everything. Nobody knows everything, right? You can't be an attorney, a CPA, and a financial planner. If you are, God bless you. But if I have those people around me who I can trust, and I have a great Medicare specialist, I have a great lender, I have great real estate professionals around me, I have a great CPA, many attorneys. And so I create this network around me. So when my families have questions, I might be 99% sure, but you have to be 100. And again, you have to go to those professionals. You have to go to those experts. So that's something that I always talk about with people is making sure, hey, I might be an expert. I might be in this business for over a decade. I've done over 2,000 second opinions of people's financial plans. You do something a couple thousand times and you start seeing those trends, and that's really where this book was developed. So I spent all this time, over a decade in the business, income planning, investments, taxes, learning about legacies, this, that, the other thing. And that's all fun. And Social Security claiming, like that's one of the biggest things. We're going to talk about that when one of the chapters about Social Security. But my whole point to all this is you got to have experts. You got to have people around you that you trust. So is it important that I'm an expert? Yes. But is it important that I have just as credible, if not more experienced experts in these different areas around me? Yes. And so these are the things that I'm going to be talking about. And this is how I got into the business. And what I'm really passionate about here, and when I wrote this book, I sit down with over 2,000 families, and you start seeing trends, and you start seeing the same fears and the same concerns popping up. And so my goal with the book, and this is probably the most important thing that I'm going to say, my goal with this book was to give people solutions to those fears that are very, very common for families in America. So my goal, you read the book, you listen to the podcast. I promise you'll get some nuggets out of here, get you thinking. Because a lot of the time when I see people fail in financial planning, it's for them not being proactive. And here's the harsh reality. Financial planning isn't always fun. It can be very, very overwhelming. It can be very, very scary. Pertaining to, hey, Alex, I don't know what stocks to pick. I don't know anything about the tax law. And so it's kind of like that credit card bill that you ran up in college and you don't want to open up the bill because you don't want to see the number. Hey, I'll just keep throwing this stack over here and putting it off. I see a lot of families do that because it's uncomfortable. Financial planning can be a very, very overwhelming subject. So hopefully throughout this process, you walk through it with me and we take a nice ride. And I help you understand it's not as complicated as it needs to be, and especially if you have a good expert leading the charge for you. So I'm really excited about this book. We're going to dive into a lot of different topics. There's going to be about 13 different episodes we do here. Each topic that I'm going to cover, occasionally I'm going to be bringing in a guest who's an expert in that subject, kind of like I was talking about, maybe a CPA, it might be an attorney. I'll bring in some industry experts, and then also there will be podcasts where I'm just going through a topic that I'm very passionate about. So I hope that you join this ride with us. There's going to be opportunities to get the book, 10 Fears of Retirement, free to you. And again, that's purely about education and just spreading the love. So I hope you join us. I hope this gives you a little bit about why I did this, who I am, and those topics that we're going to be covering. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I look forward to reaching out with you guys. We have social media, 10 Fears of Retirement. There's websites, social media. Please engage with us. That's what this is all about. You have questions from something I'm talking about, send us a line, shoot me an email. So all my information is going to be out there. The book information is going to be out there, and we have all the social media to support it. So we got a great team behind us here at Foguth Financial Group, and that's the firm that I work with here. So we look forward to walking down this educational journey, and I hope you really enjoy it. And again, I just want to give you a little tidbit about what this book's about here in this first podcast. So we'll catch you next time, and God bless you.